Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Future of the Workplace in the New Normal digital event, hosted by the CMI London Board. My name is Mel, and I'm an events delivery coordinator here at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Katie to begin today's session. If you have any questions during the session, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's event is being recorded, and it will be shared with you later today for those who have booked to attend. And the event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Now over to Katie Kelly, Hendrik Johnson, and James Ball to begin.
Hi everybody, and thank you for joining today, especially with it the start of summer again, it seems. So we appreciate you spending your lunchtime here with us, listening to our thoughts on the future of the workplace in the new normal. As Mel mentioned, I'm Katie Kelly. I'm a consultant at Oakland, specialising in change management, as well as a board member at the Chartered Management Institute. And I'll be hosting today, as well as speaking at the event. And I'll also be joined by Hendrik Johnson, who you can see on the screen from Promen, and James Ball of Oakland too. So I'll quickly pass to them to introduce themselves before I provide a short introduction of what the future of the workplace actually means. So Hendrik, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hendrik Johnson, and I'm based in Switzerland, but originally from Hamburg, Germany. I am Managing Director of Information for the Promen Group, and in my role, responsible for information technology and information management.
And hello, everybody. My name is James Ball. I'm a partner at Oakland. We are a boutique management consultancy that helps shape and deliver transformation. We're delighted to have been working with Promen on a number of transformation projects across the world, including their Digital Workplace Initiative.
Thank you both. If we just move on to the next slide, please. So what do we actually mean by the future of the workplace? So as the age-old saying goes, change is the only constant. I'm sure we've heard that a number of times. And across the world, obviously, not just in business, we are entering another new normal as we hopefully start to recover from the global pandemic that's impacted everybody's life in a number of ways over the last year. And we've also heard a lot about what the future of the workplace in the new normal means, or as some are terming it, the new normal, as we have seen a few different versions of the new normal over the last 18 months. And I'm sure this won't be the last as well. As you can see from the slide, we know we've moved into a number of different phases over the last year when we think about our workplace and crucially how we collaborate virtually as well. When the pandemic hit early last year, we were first shocked, I guess, as humans, and then secondly, as businesses, employers and colleagues as well. And we had to adapt quickly in order to survive, especially businesses that relied on face-to-face interactions, such as consulting. The pandemic forced companies to rapidly adopt new behaviours, working practices and technologies like Teams, Google Suite, Zoom, and I'm sure there are many others, and you can see them on the slide here. We rolled out these collaboration tools at pace to replicate the same interactions we would have normally had in the office environment, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And these had varying levels of success with some long-term implications as to how we will work in the future as well. So going forward into the new normal, we're now taking time to reflect upon how the workplace has changed over the last year, how we've managed this change virtually, and how it will actually impact the workplace of the future. So during today's webinar, we're going to explore whether the rapid shift to remote working has actually set back the business case for digital collaboration tools, whether remote working and the COVID experience has made it easier for organisations to embed change, and will the next generation of digital collaboration tools need to be much more human-centric? So to kick us off, I'll just pass back to Hendrik, who will start off by taking us through Promen's digital collaboration journey and their lessons learned over the last year, with a bit of help from James too, who's also been working closely with them alongside some other Oakland consultants to achieve that journey. So back to you, Hendrik.
Thank you, Katie. So first, just a very quick overview on Promen. So Promen was founded in Düsseldorf, Germany in 1984, and within 37 years, it grew from being a small engineering and construction office into a leading petrochemical producer with one global integrated value chain. Today, we are the #2 methanol producer in the world and under the top 10 fertilizer producers with 17 plants located in Trinidad, Oman, and the US. Next slide, please. With Promen grown primarily through JVs and acquisitions, in my role as MD of Information, I faced a very heterogeneous information and technology landscape. All our subsidiaries relied on local on-premises file storage solutions, which resulted in many information silos across the entire group. Different licenses agreement with Microsoft made information sharing and collaboration within the group across these silo boundaries very difficult. Email was used as the main communication collaboration tool. Traveling all over the globe for face-to-face meetings was the standard and expected to ensure every subsidiary was aligned with the group. Presence equated to productivity, and the center of work was the office. Technical difficulties and the many video conferencing systems in use did not help with this bias, obviously. So this status quo was never really questioned. We did, however, recognize that information flows within the group need to improve, and reporting needs to be streamlined to improve the speed of decision-making and get on top of the ever-present information overload. In 2018, we started adopting Microsoft 365. So first, we consolidated our various license agreements with Microsoft to harmonize our Active Directory landscape and to get everyone onto the same platform. But the problem was that most of these tools within the vast M365 suite remained largely unused. We also did not really provide comprehensive training to users on some of the new applications like Delve, Teams, OneDrive, everyone suddenly had access to. This created confusion and frustration in many parts of the group. But this was a direct result of our historically hands-off approach to IT. Simultaneously, we continued developing our SharePoint and M365 strategy. Next slide, please. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit, and from one day to the other, almost the entire workforce was required to work from home. Some of us that traveled a lot were quite used to remote and flexible working from anywhere. But this forced and sudden shift to a fully remote setup for almost everyone in the group was quite a challenge, not just technically, but also mentally. Remote working at this scale was completely new to Promen, and the center of gravity all of a sudden shifted from the office to people's homes. Obviously, this meant that we very quickly needed to mature our systems to make this transition as easy as possible for our workforce. Project teams had to figure out how to stay connected, and managers had to develop new leadership skills to remotely manage their teams. Also, our cybersecurity measures had to shift priorities to providing guidance on new threats in this remote-first environment we found ourselves in. Fortunately, the rollout of M365 in 2018 helped massively with this transition. People started to intuitively use Microsoft Teams to stay connected with their colleagues and line managers. Tactical fixes to the way we access on-premises files remotely were made to remove reliance on slow VPN connections. Also, employees embraced OneDrive to store their work files and have them accessible from anywhere. We pushed hard for Microsoft Teams to enable and improve collaboration within project teams, and it did work. Most teams stayed engaged and continued to be productive, something that many historically dismissed as a productivity and culture killer did turn out to be anything like that. And more importantly, it did not lead to the sudden drop in productivity many expected. Mostly, I would say that business as usual continued. So from an IT perspective, we were quite successful in limiting the impact of this very sudden but massive shift to how we operate. Unfortunately, not all individual experiences made were equally positive. Without training, many employees felt left alone, having to learn Teams and OneDrive themselves. Especially Teams can be quite overwhelming, and the overabundance of tools in the M365 suite also did not help, making it almost impossible for the user to filter and find what is important to them and their task at hand. And this makes our job today at managing change and improving adoption more difficult, but we have made a huge technological leap and mindset change that we can and will build upon.
And it was interesting, Hendrik, I think that pre-COVID, the business had access to Teams for collaboration, file sharing, virtual meetings, and so on, which you've alluded to, but it was barely used. When the pandemic forced the business to work remotely, suddenly it had the burning platform to drive change. And as as with many businesses, a step change in user adoption and working practices with those tools happened almost overnight. I was talking to a CFO of another business earlier this week, and he told me that he thought his business had jumped 5 or maybe even 10 years ahead in their change journey in the last 12 months, which I think is a pretty common observation from many businesses that have been through the same change and have seen that same jump.
Thank you, James. Next slide, please. But also for Promen, I think the important question is, what do we take away from this long term? And obviously, so many good learnings and experiences were made during that time. I think more importantly, video conferencing and more specifically Teams as a communication tool is reliable and works and can to a certain degree replace in-person meetings. I would even go so far and say that it does not only work, but sometimes even improves how we conduct our meetings. I mean, virtual meetings, if you think about it, do level the playing ground for all attendees. Everyone on a video conference occupies the same virtual space and screen estate, and therefore gives everyone equal opportunities to speak, whereas before, many face-to-face meetings were run by the loudest in the room. So a more remote or flexible office does work, and I would say that most organizations did not see a demonstrable loss in productivity. Remote or flexible working proved to be a viable option as we transition into the new normal. But clearly it requires a shift in how we lead and manage our people. At Promen, we did not want to lose all these important learnings while implementing this into a long-term model. Our current digital workplace strategy focuses around making the workplace of tomorrow as efficient as possible, while still offering more flexibility. This includes making Teams the core workplace and collaboration tool, while also embracing the use of SharePoint to remove the information silos I was talking about earlier and improve collaboration across company boundaries. We want to use M365 and its functionality wherever possible, but also provide extensive training to ensure that everyone can fully embrace the benefits of these tools and get the good learnings and ensure that the good learnings from the past 18 months do stick.
It was notable that the Promen senior management weren't just looking for us to make sure the improvements in collaboration and around the digital workplace weren't lost as lockdown rules eased and people came back into the office, but rather to solidify them and build on them, to use this as a springboard. There was no question of going back to the old ways of working and old behaviours. And in fact, the task was, I think, very clearly to use the momentum that we already had to make further gains and further improvements. Thank you. Katie.
If we can go on to the next slide, please. So from a people perspective, change leaders have always traditionally relied on opportunities to bring people together face-to-face, to share ideas, drive engagement, build excitement, and ultimately deliver long-lasting transformation. And some recent research conducted by a body called ProSci, which many of you may have heard of, highlighted that respondents consistently cited face-to-face interactions as the most effective form of communication, especially in times of change. And as a change manager myself, I've always gained invaluable insights through face-to-face interaction, and probably most usefully in informal kitchen conversations or water cooler conversations, whatever you want to call them, rather than structured environments. And this, of course, has all been largely non-existent over the last year. But it's not all doom and gloom. Embedding change over the last year has had its positives that we can learn from when we think about the future ways of working. And it would be great to hear more about your own experiences and what you think has actually helped you land change virtually by popping it in the comments section. I'd love to learn what your organisations have found useful. So firstly, if we think about the positives, embedding change successfully relies on engaging a broad spectrum of people to ensure those impacted by said change have a voice in shaping it. And one of the best things I found about a digital environment is that there's no limit, technically, on how many people can participate. We've got hundreds of people joining us today, for example, where they can participate from. Again, we've got people joining from all over the world, and how or when they decide to provide input, even if this is after the event itself. As you can see from the image in the top left corner, This is many of my Oakland colleagues using the power of digital collaboration to enthusiastically take part in one of our monthly socials where we did wine tasting, demonstrating the power of collaboration. People also like to collaborate and learn and share in different ways. That's been known for a while, which moves me on to the use of the creative digital collaboration tools themselves, which we know are getting better and better, and actually it's quite hard to keep up with the functionality. We've already covered these in quite a lot of detail, so I won't dwell on them too much, but the advancements in digital collaboration tools over the last year, apart from early on in the pandemic hearing, I think you're on mute, number of times and probably still in my nightmares, the tools themselves have actually been quite transformational in how we work together to share ideas and plan change at the click of a button. To truly involve all individuals within large and diverse groups, we need to enable participation in a number of ways. So the digital collaboration tools allow people to communicate not only in person through video, but also in writing, through chat functions that you're doing throughout this webinar, through surveys even, and through pictures. I really like expressing my reactions in meetings through emojis as an example, which you can't get face to face. All of this means that you're truly able to benefit from everyone's point of view and include this feedback when embedding any type of change as well. And Hendrik mentioned earlier as well, you all take up the same virtual space on a digital collaboration tool, which can really help people actually deliver their kind of true feelings on a subject, which all goes forward to helping embed change eventually. I'm currently working with Hendrik's organisation Promen as well on a different transformation project based in Trinidad, although I'm not obviously actually in the Caribbean yet. At the beginning of this transformation, when I was gathering initial insights on the appetite for change and lessons learned from past transformations across the leadership team, working virtually actually allowed me to gather this at an accelerated rate and from a much wider audience. These conversations were largely one-to-one because they could have been quite sensitive in nature. So digital collaboration tools like Teams actually made it easy to replicate this human interaction on a one-to-one basis, even though I was nearly 5,000 miles away across my computer screen in London. And then when it came to actually presenting our initial plans on change management to the 1,500 person strong organisation, people could ask questions directly through digital collaboration or anonymously, provide reactions, and of course, see the whole thing recorded afterwards if they couldn't make the session live. And the tools themselves also provide us with a channel where we, as I said, take up exactly the same amount of space. So people are more willing to participate in sessions like this and can participate through chat functions, through surveys when there are large groups of people. Thirdly, embedding change and change management from a people perspective is obviously about inspiring colleagues as humans. There are many synergies between embedding change and adopting to change in our personal lives, as well as our professional ones. And of course, Change Management 101 tells you that leadership are one of the most important drivers of change. So getting their input, getting them to share messages, showing support for transformations, unsurprisingly, often rallies the troops. And I've noticed both from a client perspective, as well as internally at my firm, Oakland, that leadership seem more accessible as we work and embed change virtually. So they're no longer constantly in different locations, at various client offices, or locked away in meeting rooms all day. They're now only a quick 15-minute video call away. We're all in the same boat. We're all behind our screens for long periods every day. So it seems easier to drop someone a message and arrange a video call, no matter how senior they are. And of course, this often happens in the comfort of our own homes, which has the added benefit of reminding people that we're all human and have lives and families outside of our day jobs. And these have been inextricably linked over the last year. We used to have a saying at Oakland, actually, that partners are people as well. And I think that last year that's been made even more apparent. Seeing this in action on the picture on the slide, you can see one of our partners, Dom, attempting to teach me and some other colleagues how to make a paper aeroplane. Coincidentally, we were also working on an aerospace client at the time. So just a demonstration of human leadership. Leading me on to my last point on my non-exhaustive list of positives for embedding change virtually, which might be one of the more controversial ones. Some might say that people are more susceptible to change because of the pandemic. The world's obviously gone through one of the biggest changes many of us have seen in our lifetimes. And with this has come a sense that we're all in this together and are now used to adapting together for the greater good. And I'm in no way suggesting direct comparisons between changes that we've had to adapt to because of the pandemic and implementing a new piece of technology to run HR or finance processes, for example. But people have once again been reminded that together we can embed change for the greater good if we can, and it is achievable. Does this mean the end of change fatigue? Probably not. And on that point, I'll move on to the negatives I've acknowledged trying to embed change virtually over the last year, which I won't dwell on too much as I want to save time to cover my predictions for the future as well. So recent statistics show that the average attention span online is 8 seconds. So I hope you are all still listening now. That's actually the same attention span as a goldfish. So this definitely needs to be considered when engaging with people digitally, especially when we're trying to communicate important change messages or train people virtually. So we should try to make these messages focus on one idea at a time and as visually engaging as possible. Of course, you do have to deal with the added distractions of home life as well. James and I were joking earlier whilst we were in the waiting room that I often get Amazon parcels passed through my window during meetings. Real life continues. We also have emails popping up on computer screens and people turning their cameras off and zoning out. And I'll come on to how we might counteract some of those in the new normal shortly. And obviously, digitally, there's also less chance to digest information by osmosis. There are less opportunities in physical settings together where you might gather feedback, find out what's going on the ground through those valuable water cooler or kitchen conversations I mentioned that I was a big fan of earlier. And then lastly, it's often difficult to show true authenticity digitally, which is obviously key when engaging people in change and understanding their true feelings as well. It's difficult to pick up on subtle signals and body language that I found to be crucial indicators of how people are actually adapting to change and how we can use that information to plan our activities going forward. And of course, it's further compounded when you are met with an image, as you can see on the screen, with a sea of initials in a video call meeting instead of people's actual faces. So next slide, please. As we look forward to the new normal, we know we can navigate the challenges of embedding change. We know there are positives. We know there are benefits. How can we do this to actually make the best of the situation we're working in? So my first point might be an obvious one, but I don't think it should be underestimated. So we should plan interactions as far in advance as possible and be purposeful about them with clear objectives and outcomes. And this is even more important now than in the old normal. Change management working successfully and being a core part of the wider project team is crucial to the success of any change program. I hope we all agree. And not to feel sorry for myself, but it's often hard enough making this happen when working face-to-face together. So it becomes even more important to ensure the right structures, checkpoints, and transparency of activity is available when we're not actually co-located to successfully embed change. When some people will be physically together and other team members not, this becomes an even bigger challenge as we need to fight harder to not be forgotten about, essentially. Then my next point, this level of rigor also needs to be applied to the way that you build relationships. I've mentioned a few times over the last 10 minutes or so that we can't obviously rely on those coffee machine chats to check in, get feedback and build relationships any longer, or not as much as we used to anyway. And I'm not suggesting that as change leaders, we wouldn't normally have a careful approach to this in the past, using things like stakeholder analyses, communication plans, logs, power maps. The list of documentation goes on. But now we need to remember the value of this level of diligence when building relationships in the new normal. As I mentioned previously, planning and consistency is going to be key to ensure that we keep those relationships going in order for leaders, colleagues, project teams, etc., to feel engaged in the change and provide feedback. And on the flip side, we should recognise that although a more structured approach to building relationships is going to improve the likelihood of successful change, we need to strike a balance so we don't overwhelm colleagues and team members and ourselves. I'm sure we've all experienced a day of back-to-back Teams meetings, Zooms meetings, we term it Zoom fatigue, where we've got video call after video call. We do need to give ourselves space to take in the outcomes of those meetings, follow up actions, and we can utilise digital platforms actually to get more input and feedback to keep those lines of communication open. And who knows, maybe even eventually that will mean less meetings overall, which I'm sure lots of us will be pleased about. Which brings me on to my third point, and coming back to the digital tools themselves. As we spoke about when discussing what's been easier, or I guess not harder at least, when embedding digital change in a virtual world, the advancements of digital tools that we've seen over the last year has been immense and mind-boggling at times. The functionalities that allow us to recreate as close to normal working environments online are ever increasing. From the myriad of apps that Teams has to offer, I learn about new ones every single day, to virtual working spaces like Mural. We definitely have the opportunity to grasp those with both hands and increase our chances of embedding change more successfully as a result. As I mentioned, I do struggle to keep up with the options, and we're kind of driven in terms of how we digitally collaborate by the latest apps that are released from Teams and other digital collaboration tools. So it's important to understand what will work and what won't work in your company with your people. Listen to people and collaborate in a way that suits them. This will become even more important when we move into hybrid ways of working, which we're probably already stepping into at the moment, when we have to balance virtual ways of working and physical collaboration. I don't know if anyone's been the only person on the other side of a computer screen when everyone else has been in the room, but it doesn't exactly feel like the most engaging experience. So we need to not assume that everyone will just fit into the new normal seamlessly. We've obviously just spent the last year working virtually, and this is another change that we need to pay as close attention to when adapting. And then my last point to consider when thinking about how we successfully embed change is back to relationships and people. And as a change manager, that's what I'm passionate about. So back to my earlier point when I mentioned that change management is about supporting people as humans. That's what we all are, whether we're in a work environment or not. To adopt change, this is received better when done with honesty and authenticity. I think we'd all agree. And these are two words that you probably wouldn't couple with digital collaboration tools. It's often difficult, as I mentioned, to pick up on subtle cues and body language to convey a message over video conference, which I've sometimes felt like there is an additional layer between myself and the other person on the other side when chatting through an idea or gathering their input. So we need to put more effort into this. But if we do go back to the positives of the ways of working over the last year, we know that we've all experienced a massive worldwide shift together, which has brought that sense of camaraderie. We also know that the paradigms of power have shifted as leadership have become more accessible. And as change leaders, we need to remind ourselves of this and utilise it to strengthen trust and inspire employees, which can also help to contribute to the accelerated and successful adoption of changes. And that, as my last point, leads me nicely to introduce James back, who's going to talk about collaboration tools themselves and how they might become more human-centric in the new normal.
Thank you, Katie. We know that the digital workplace won't disappear. It's going to be critical to find a way to manage change with staff effectively in the new normal, or the new normal, because employees are telling us that they want to maintain flexibility in the workplace, in some cases to quite a startling extent. I'm not suggesting this is true of everyone in every workforce, but just to illustrate it, one survey, in this case by the software vendor Buffer, found that 99% of current remote workers would like to work remotely at least some of the time for the rest of their career. And there's a suggestion that some employees would even be willing to change their terms and conditions to achieve this. The research-based consultancy Global Workplace Analytics has data to suggest that 37% of remote employees would take a 10% pay cut to continue working from home. Now, these data points might be outliers or perhaps not, but either way, they do highlight that remote working is unlikely to disappear altogether. Next slide, please. And although digital workplace and collaboration tools have matured incredibly quickly in the last 12 months, you only have to see the share price rises and the corresponding user rises in tools like Zoom. They still have a long way to go to seamlessly replace face-to-face interaction and physical ways of working. For Microsoft users, which I know isn't everybody, but for Microsoft users, Teams has already become a cornerstone of our remote working tool set. But the next leap forward will see all of the users' tools integrated into Teams, with Teams becoming truly their one-stop shop digital workplace. We can also expect it to become more customizable, with us being able to tailor it more to our own specific ways of working and daily tasks, rather than the rather generic methods that we work with Teams today.
And James, I think talking about Teams, I think it is very important, and probably more importantly than ever, that we need to stay on top of the technology development. And in an environment that moves more and more to software as a service, where big players like Microsoft updates and changes the focus of their tools constantly, we as businesses need to understand that we are not in control of the roadmap anymore. And our IT departments need to vet Microsoft M365 strategy all the time and assess the impact of major updates on the business before potentially releasing it, and preparing the business for these changes has become hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Slightly further from home, but virtual reality and X reality will bring together physical and virtual workplaces even more. We can already create virtual meeting rooms in Teams using the together mode, but it isn't hard to imagine a much deeper, more immersive virtual reality meeting room, helping us interact with each other in an increasingly more natural way. And with X reality, we'll see the merging of physical and digital workplaces to a much greater extent, with users being able to superimpose digital information on their physical work. This technology, to some extent, is already available and rather in its infancy, but it will only become more prevalent. Slightly less glamorous than VR and XR is admin automation and AI. This too really is in its infancy, but perhaps is a bit more familiar to us. Many of us will have used or at least tried virtual calendar booking assistants, and any Microsoft user already gets productivity advice from Microsoft's Cortana. Whether we do anything with it or not is another matter, but these services will grow and become more effective, further blurring our physical and virtual work. And finally, the rollout of 5G will impact not only field force workers, but home workers, bringing up to 100 times faster data access compared to 4G, and 2 to 3 times faster speeds than the average home broadband today. With any luck, the days of pixelated webcam feeds and temperamental internet connections will soon be over. These are just some of the technology advances that will make digital workplace more human-centric, and the pace of change and more of these tools are going to be coming to market over the next 12 months. I'm sure the next 12 months will be as difficult to manage and as fast-paced as the last 12. Thanks. Katie.
Thank you. So we've got now about 20 minutes to cover off some questions, and we've had quite a few already submitted as part of the sign-up process. So I'm going to start off with those, but I do see we've had a few in the comments section as well. So thank you very much. And we'll come on to those, keep them coming through as we're answering these. And my first question was from Catherine. So thank you for that, Catherine. From a leadership perspective, what do you consider to be the biggest impediment to effective remote or hybrid ways of working? And what can we as leaders do to overcome that?
Yeah, Katie, I think I can take that first. So in my mind, there are a couple of major hurdles that we need to overcome to implement a successful hybrid ways of working. I see many misconceptions that we need to discuss with skeptics and hopefully demystify. So some of the more popular misconceptions I can think of are, for example, remote working destroys company culture, which I mentioned earlier, and employees are generally less productive. I think a hybrid model requires completely different leadership styles and foresight of management, and I would say that maybe not everyone has these skills today. So this new way of working, and obviously new requirements on leaders, obviously seems threatening at first to many. But in my opinion, as leaders, leaders need to be open to embracing models of working that are adaptive and interchangeable, and basically have the work and its desired output determine where and when the work gets done. And I think trust in employees is paramount, and organizations need to fully support this hybrid model for it to be effective. For example, by adapting facilities, workspaces, and sometimes workflows and processes as well. And we as leaders need to create a culture of accepted flexibility and shared ownership between themselves or between ourselves as leaders and our employees.
Thank you. Then the next question we had from Ed: how do you ensure leaders and their staff hit the right balance between online presence and presenteeism, particularly in tech teams during the pandemic?
I can take this one. Although I have a few challenges on the question itself, actually. I think the question is referring to how leaders can find the balance between working remotely and working on site in an office. And assuming I've got that right, I don't think that balance is any different for tech teams compared to any other team, to be honest, although I'd be interested to hear other people's opinions or see their opinions on the comments. Presenteeism should always be avoided. I think everyone would agree with that. As a leader, you tell your team what you tell your team about online versus physical presence is as important as the example you set in your own work habits. We all need to demonstrate that it's not only okay to have flexibility about where you work, but to actually encourage it and to make sure it's understood that it is encouraged. And we also need to recognize what works for one person won't necessarily work for another. Given that some of anyone's team are likely to prefer to work remotely and others will prefer to come into the office, leaders need to be available to both, support both, and set the example of flexibility around their own work location. That might not quite have answered the question that Ed had in mind if I didn't read it quite right. So if you're online, Ed, let me know in the comments.
Thank you. Then we've got our first from Ryan. Do you think we are migrating to a hybrid working system with a few days working from home, others from work? What are your thoughts?
I can take that one again. So I would say that we're clearly in a direction of in that direction of travel. But I would say that only a few companies will probably move to a fully remote setup immediately, and for many companies that will never become an option. So flexible or hybrid working in the meantime, I think for many companies is the more viable solution. But as I said before, I think the work needs to determine where and when it gets done. And sometimes, obviously, it is better to just do your work from the office and collaborating face-to-face with your colleagues. But sometimes I think it is perfectly reasonable to do it from anywhere else. But a hybrid model has its downside, and businesses need to carefully manage these. And like Katie said, having 4 people physically in a meeting room and 1 person dialing in cannot result in the 4 having a separate conversation in the room without really involving the virtual participant. I think for this flexibility to become successful and to finally work, businesses need to remove the stigma of people not working in the office, basically offering everyone the similar opportunities, either virtual or physical.
I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this one as well, which is I think there's an awful lot that can be done with the physical office setup to encourage hybrid working, and all businesses need to think about the way that their offices are configured, particularly collaboration spaces and meeting rooms, to break down those barriers between those who are communicating face to face in an office environment and those who are virtual on the end of a phone or a video call. The old-fashioned ways of setting up meeting rooms and so on just doesn't lend itself to that. But there are relatively easy things you can do to break down those barriers and to really help those physically present and those online engage equally.
And James Murray has just asked a question which follows on from that. How can we make work at home and work in the office more productive? I doubt it's just about technology. So what about purpose, performance, and physical space? Bums on seats isn't the answer, which you agree with, James. But how can we make the hybrid way of working easier for everybody, talking beyond the technology?
Just reading the question again to make sure I've understood it properly. I think that we just talked about physical space. There's clearly the more human aspects of the challenges of working remotely. We're thinking about performance management. We touched on culture and cultural impact, and depending on what extent you see that. And I think working remotely and working in a hybrid environment in particular will cause all businesses and all business leaders to look at all aspects of the way they run their business and review whether they still make sense in the hybrid world and how you can make up for the lack of face-to-face interaction. One of the things that we've done internally at Oakland was to recognize that there's no one interaction that works for everybody. And so instead you have to find as many clever and varied ways of engaging people as possible so that at least one of those will work for any given person and across a period of time, across a week, a month or longer. You've got enough interactions and enough ways of reaching people and engaging people for everybody to feel suitably engaged. And it takes a large amount of effort. That is something we didn't have to do before. That's new effort that the business needs to take on and that leaders need to take on. And we need to be very conscious of it. I'm not sure I know what the silver bullet is and the answer, but certainly it involves consciously recognizing it is new, it is more work, it is something extra has to be done, and reviewing all aspects of the way business is done.
But I think it's important to note that this is only for the transition period. I mean, there is more work, but every change requires work. So I think it is important that we don't just dismiss the idea right at the start just because it requires a little bit of work in the beginning, because there are benefits to it. There are clear benefits to it. But sometimes it just develops into a philosophical debate, and then you have two beliefs battling it out, and then you don't actually achieve anything. I think we need to be aware that this requires work, but not forever.
And the reality is the genie is out of the bottle with remote working and with the flexibility that's introduced. I think people have been crying out for workplace flexibility for years, and it's been relatively easy for businesses to pay lip service to it or even dismiss it. The last 12 months have shown that the majority of businesses, or many businesses, can not only survive but thrive remotely and in a hybrid model. And I don't see employees letting us off the hook. So this is now a cost of doing business, and businesses have to make it work. Yeah, and can make it work. Yeah.
Exactly. And it kind of leads me in. We had a question earlier, if I can find it, which was essentially, if none of us have done this before, who is best placed to train anyone else? And again, I don't know if there's a silver bullet in terms of answering that question, but it's about learning as we go. And it's not standing up and saying we know exactly what the path over the next few years is going to look like in terms of how we work together and collaborate together. We learn as we go, and we've already proven, I think, over the last year that we're learning very rapidly. I can't remember what the exact statistic is, but we've accelerated technology adoption in organizations. Someone tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think it's like 10 years further than we would have been at this point a year down the line. So we're learning very quickly and learning how to train people in how to adapt to new ways of working, but it's about sharing and acknowledging how people are most comfortable in working, and feeding those back in, I think, to change approaches and any training approaches as well.
And I think that is important. That is important to note. I mean, we are not really alone in this, because there are so many other companies that face the same challenge right now. We also don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there's hybrid working or fully remote offices have existed for quite some time already, and there are companies that do it quite successfully. So I think you just need to have a look at how they do it, because I mean, they all the things that we would consider very hard to do remotely, like hiring people and so on. I think that these companies do it for years already, completely remote. They've never met face to face. I think there's some very important learnings that we just can take from these companies as well. So we're not alone in this, and others have already done it mostly.
Exactly, good point. Then we got a question from Christian Ramdeen. And Christian asks, some organisations are revisiting ways of work, proving effectiveness to guide policy changes requires quantitative data. Is there a menu of analytics available to compare the then and now?
Is there a menu of analytics available? So, I mean, this data needs to be built up. How many organisations have built up this data already? I'm not sure, and I don't think it's readily available. But there's no reason why any organisation can't do this analytics on their own businesses if they can do it retrospectively beforehand. I think that the evidence for remote working and policy changes around remote working and flexible working is almost intuitive. It almost doesn't require analytics to justify in many cases. I think if the case in any particular business or function within a business is not so clear cut, then it would be a matter, I think, of gathering data from that particular organisation, perhaps during a pilot. I'm not aware of an industry standard bank of data to support it, but there will be studies that we can refer to, or similarly, as I say, find the data internally.
And and I would say that it might not even be fruitful also to do that, because, like you said before, the genie is out of the bottle. So and if the workforce demands it, I mean, there's not much you can do. Even if you could prove that it's not as efficient and you lose productivity, I mean, there's already a scarcity with skilled workers, and the skilled labor requests flexible working. What can you do as a company? Even if you prove them, it's not as efficient. If you lose your workforce, I mean, there's hardly anything you can do.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting policy, slightly different answer, or a different question I'm answering, but there's an interesting policy decision to be taken for businesses where they have a large proportion of the business that has to be on site. And Promen, to a certain extent, is one of those businesses with its operators in the plants. If you're in manufacturing, if you're in hospitality, and whether you have to standardize your policies across all of your workforces or can tailor them workforce by workforce. And I've seen businesses take both views, that we need to standardize to be fair across the whole business, or actually no, it's on a workforce by workforce basis. I think that's an interesting, almost ethical policy question for businesses impacted by it.
Thank you. Then got one question that says, do you think the pandemic has impacted the working environment in a positive light, and what can be done better to improve? And I'll pick this up initially. Think about the working environment and thinking about the office working environment and home working environment. I'll answer it from a position of comparing the two. I think it's impacted different people differently. I think it's very much personality based and based on preference. We can do all we can as organisations to support people how we think they need to be supported to work effectively. But it does come down to personal preference and how you prefer to work. I know at Oaklyn, there's a very big split in people who have really liked working from home, the flexibility it offers. People find themselves to be kind of more effective in use of their time. People like being over a computer screen rather than in person. And for some other people, that has been hellish. And people want to go back to the office to actually interact with people and be in that whiteboarding session and putting sticky notes all over the wall. So I think it's about acknowledging there's not only two sets of people either. There's some people that obviously like somewhere in between, acknowledging that people's positive working environment is not the same, and trying to accommodate that and find out from your staff what they actually want from it, and trying to accommodate that as much as possible, essentially, from my perspective.
And I do agree with you. I think we here in Switzerland at Promen specifically experienced the same thing, because we went through various lockdowns or various different lockdowns. So the first lockdown, the office was closed for four weeks, but then it reopened again for those who wanted to come to the office. It was still a home office recommendation, but it wasn't required. But then at the beginning of this year, the office had to close for almost 3 months. So that obviously put a lot of stress on those people that like to come to the office. So those people who embraced home office and remote working liked it. Obviously, for them, nothing has changed. But for those people that actually like to come to the office 5 days a week, 4 days a week, doesn't really matter. For them, it was a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just need to recognize it, that whatever we do long term, and whatever model we implement long term, it potentially needs to be a very individual discussion with everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This isn't a question, but Rob's just commented, I think that as with many things, communication is key. Leaders must be aware who in their teams are struggling or need extra help, as it's up to us as leaders to make that happen, present or remote. So yeah, completely agree with that. It is all about communication, engaging with your staff and working out how they're feeling and doing that on a regular basis. And I think that is actually one of the really positive things that's come out of the pandemic, because we've realised that how important that is more than ever. And I'm hoping that won't discontinue as we move out of the pandemic, that we'll be more attuned to how comfortable our staff are in certain situations or working environments going forward. This one's quite a practical one. So this is from Stephen. How can the physical office space be set up to be more conducive to collaboration, especially in smaller offices where hot desking was the norm pre-COVID?
I think there are quite a few things that you can do. I mean, just when I look in my office, everyone just sits behind 1 or 2 large computer screens. So I would say in a hybrid office environment, you would just remove the screens, because and just embrace collaboration. You have a screen at home. If you sit on your screen the whole day, you can do it from anywhere. You don't need to be in the office. So when you're in the office, embrace collaboration and talking to your colleagues. I would at least design the workspace a little bit different, the individual workspace. And then in meeting rooms, I would just say, don't sit around one big table, everybody just side facing the camera, but face directly the camera. Make the meeting evolve around the screen and not be just the screen just and something that sits on the side of the meeting room everybody can just ignore.
Yeah, I think you have to think about what the purpose of the office is now. And pre-COVID, the purpose of most offices was somewhere for someone to do 8 hours of work at a computer with a telephone and the odd meeting, if they were lucky. Whereas now, I would suggest that if someone is going to spend their whole day on their computer and on the telephone, there's probably not a lot of point in coming into the office. The use of the office is now should be more about meeting people, collaborating, catching up, making up for the fact that we don't have those physical that physical contact when we're working remotely. So we've reconfigured our office. We actually expanded our office space when everyone else was contracting it. We took advantage of some of the deals in the property market to expand our office space for 2 reasons. One is recognizing that it is difficult with hot desking and to maintain a social distancing and someone does take more space. But secondly, we reconfigured the space to be much more focused around collaboration and meetings, both face-to-face and hybrid. So allowing for workshopping with a group of people in the office, and similarly people working virtually. With limited finite space, that is hard. But I think the answer is to think about what you're using the space for, and whether it needs to be primarily desk based, or whether you can, even in a small space, configure it differently to cater for more of the collaboration and catching up and the interpersonal side of work, rather than the 8 hours of tapping away on the keyboard.
I found kind of going back into the office and thinking about the benefits from a collaboration perspective to be particularly important in terms of coaching and mentoring. I think that's what I found to be most hard over a computer screen when you're trying to teach someone something, which as a change manager, when we get into the realms of training people in systems, etc., I think will apply there as well. But I think that's where I found the office space to be most beneficial, when I've gone in to actually talk through problems and coach and mentor as well. Right, we've only got a few minutes left, so we haven't got any more time for other questions, unfortunately. But thank you for everybody that has popped some in the comment section. If we go on to the next slide, please, Mel. If you do want to continue the conversation, we'd love to carry on talking to many of you about the future of workplace. So you can find all of the details there on our websites and LinkedIn and Instagram, etc., to connect with Hendrik, James, or I. And obviously, we've got our personal LinkedIn accounts as well, which you can contact. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll pass back to Mel to close.
Great. Unfortunately, that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Katie, Hendrik, and James, for your insights and expertise. If you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, where you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. And if you're not yet a member, please join our community via the link as well in the live chat, where you can gain full access of Management Direct portal. And you can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Also, don't forget, if you want to connect with our CMI London board to find out more about them, the links are also in the live chat. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.